We recently completed research gauging the impact of new technologies on gasoline demand in the United States. We primarily looked at the adoption of electronic vehicles, EVs, autonomous vehicles, AVs, and ride-hailing, ride-sharing. Based on our research, we developed three key conclusions. First, vehicle miles traveled will be higher than expected. Second, car ownership will be less than expected. And third, gasoline demand will be much, much less than expected. Look at each one of those individually. First of all, vehicle miles traveled. Here we see ride-hailing and ride-sharing being a key driver of higher than expected vehicle miles traveled. The reason is twofold. First of all, ride-hailing often occurs mileage or travel without a passenger that a private vehicle would otherwise not. Secondly, we have found that ride-hailing often incentivizes travel that otherwise not be taken. As such, incorporating ride-hailing adoption into our forecasts and assuming about 20% of trips in 2050 are taken using ride-hailing, we estimate light-duty vehicle miles traveled in the U.S. will total about 3.8 trillion miles in 2050 compared to the EIA's forecast of 3.3 trillion. On car ownership, we examined the impact of EVs, AVs, and ride-hailing, but found that AVs to be a key determinant in future vehicle ownership. Ultimately, we expect that the adoption of AVs will reduce ride-hailing costs to about $1 per mile. At this level, about 30% of car owners will be incentivized to abandon car ownership for ride-hailing use full-time. The result will be a smaller car fleet. By 2050, we estimate that about 290 million vehicles will be in the U.S. car fleet. This is much less than the about 310 million that would otherwise be expected based off historical ownership trends and population growth. However, we still expect annual sales to fall between 15 and 19 million units annually, given that ride-hailing will result in greater utilization and as a result higher scrap rates. As such, vehicle sales on an annual basis will need to be at same levels that they are currently. Finally, on gasoline demand, we expect long-term gasoline demand to fall well below consensus levels. In 2050, we estimate that gasoline demand to fall by 70% compared to a 35% decline for the EIA's forecast. The primary driver is greater EV adoption than what the EIA is projecting. We ultimately estimate that by 2050, about 45% of the new vehicle fleet will be EVs, 45% will be hybrids, and only 10% will be internal combustion engines. This results in a much greater fuel-efficient fleet than is currently projected. And even despite higher vehicle miles traveled from the adoption of ride-hailing, it still results in much lower gasoline demand. That said, by 2030, we expect about 10% greater gasoline demand than what the EIA is expecting. The difference is twofold. One, again, higher VMT for ride-hailing, but also we incorporate recent CAFE changes by the Trump administration, which should reduce the vehicle fuel efficiency of the fleet, increasing gasoline demand over the medium term. But again, long term, our forecast calls for much less gasoline demand, 70% decline from 2017 compared to the 35% decline for the EIA.